We're now on the record. My name is Devin Mulholland. I'm a videographer with co-defendant Services. Today's date is October 2nd, 2020. The time is 9:04 a.m. Eastern Time. This remote video deposition is being held in the matter of opioid litigation, State of Rhode Island versus Purdue Pharma Inc. et al. The deponent is Mark Trudeau. All parties to this deposition are appearing remotely and have agreed to the witness being sworn in remotely. Due to the nature of remote reporting, please pause briefly before speaking to ensure all parties are heard completely. Counsel will be noted on the stenographic record. The court reporter is Maureen Pollard and will not swear in the witness.
Mr. Trudeau, could you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Counsel, you may proceed.
I'm sorry, are you going to ask for counsel to identify themselves?
You can if you like. Sorry, I said stenographic record, but you could do video.
I think I didn't necessarily hear, but Mimi Liu on behalf of the plaintiff.
John Bucher on behalf of Mallincrodt and the witness.
Andrew O'Connor on behalf of Mallinkrodt LLC, Spec GX and the witness.
Are there any other attorneys?
Alyssa Uspensky from Works and Gray on behalf of Mallinkrodt LLC, Spec GX and the witness.
Anyone else?
Don Lohman, Vice President, General Counsel of Mallinkrodt.
Anyone else? Okay. Good morning, Mr. Trudeau.
Morning.
We've not previously met. My name is Mimi Liu. I'm an attorney with the law firm Motley Rice in the Washington, D.C. office, and I represent plaintiff the State of Rhode Island. Can you please state your full name for the record?
Mark C. Trudeau.
And you understand that you took an oath to answer the questions that I ask you today truthfully to the best of your ability, correct?
I do.
And is there any reason you cannot testify truthfully today?
No.
Are you currently married, Mr. Trudeau?
Yes.
And what is your current home address?
I live
And what is the address of your home?
specific address is
And how long have you lived at that address?
approximately 2 years.
And what was your last home address before your home in?
I lived in the area.
And was that in, was a town called?
That's correct, yes.
And do you own any other homes?
I do.
And what other, or I guess houses, what other houses or homes do you own?
I own a home and one in
Do you maintain a residence in?
a physical residence?
Yes.
No.
Do you have a rental house or apartment?
No.
Do you have a home in?
Not currently.
Did you at some point own a home in?
No.
You said not currently. Can you clarify what you meant by that?
I had an apartment that was leased, rented.
During what time period were you renting an apartment in?
Period would have been, best of my recollection, approximately 2016 to 2018.
And what was the purpose of your renting an apartment in?
I was spending about a third of my time physically
And was that for work?
for work, yes.
And who paid for that rental?
The company did.
And why is it that you gave up that rental in 2018?
There was no longer, it was deemed there was no longer a requirement for me to spend as much time physically in the,
I'm sorry, were you finished?
yes.
And why was that?
That was the advice that I received from our legal team.
And beginning in 2018, when you gave up your rental, where were you spending most of your time with respect to your work at Mallincrodt?
At that point, primarily New Jersey and some in St. Louis.
And what is your current office address?
Objection vague.
Where do you currently work on a day-to-day basis?
I have at least 3 offices, one in St. Louis, one in New Jersey, and one in the UK.
You have no office in Ireland, is that correct?
No physical office, no.
And where are you? Are you in one of your offices currently?
We're in the New Jersey offices, yes.
And when you say we, who else is in that office with you for this deposition?
Today, I have the 2 lawyers that identified themselves, and my assistant is here.
And the 2 lawyers are John Bucher and Andrew O'Connor?
That's correct.
And where is Mr. Lohman sitting right now?
I don't know.
But he's not in the New Jersey office with you currently.
No.
Where does Mr. Lohman normally have his office?
As I understand it, Don operates out of St. Louis.
What was your last office address before New Jersey became, I guess, one of your main offices?
Objection vague. Objection mischaracterizes his testimony.
You can answer if you understood the question.
I don't. Could you clarify?
Sure. So we spoke with Mr. Harbaugh yesterday. You know Mr. Harbaugh, correct?
I do.
And he said that in 2015, you moved to spending more of your time in the New Jersey office. Is that fair?
I don't recall when we actually opened the New Jersey office, but I was spending more time in New Jersey than I had been previously. That's correct.
And prior to that 2015 roughly time period, were you spending most of your time with your work for Mallincrodt PLC in the St. Louis office?
I believe that's correct. Yes, I believe that's correct.
And did you physically sit in the same office that you held before the spinoff of the PLC?
Objection vague. Objection lack of foundation. You can answer if you can understand the question.
Let me clarify. Mr. Trudeau, when did you start working for Mallincrodt?
February of 2012.
And when you started in February of 2012, where did you sit?
In St. Louis.
And is that the same?
Technically Hazelwood, St. Louis area.
Okay, so when you said that before New Jersey, you spent most of your time in the St. Louis office, is that the same office you held in February of 2012 when you started with Mallincrodt?
The same physical office, yes.
What is your work email address?
It's mark.trudeau@mnk.com.
And for how long have you held that email address?
Approximately 3 years, I believe.
And at some point, did the company transition from using Mallincrodt.com to using mnk.com?
That's correct.
And why was that change made?
Don't recall specifically. I think it was primarily for convenience.
And when you say convenience, what do you mean?
Simply that MNK is shorter and easier than Mallincrodt.
And MNK is the ticker symbol for Mallincrodt PLC, correct?
That's correct.
And what was your email address, if you could spell it out for me, before it switched over to mnk.com?
It was mark.trudeau@Mallincrodt, MALLINCKRODT.com.
And is Mallincrodt.com for everyone in the company now switched to mnk.com?
I don't know.
Do you use your Mallincrodt.com email anymore?
I do.
Okay, so you have two work email addresses?
Well, the Mallincrodt.com and the MNK.com, I believe both still exist, but I don't know that for certain.
So would you log in separately to see the Mallincrodt.com emails that are sent to you versus the mnk.com emails that are sent to you?
No, to the best of my knowledge, emails going to either extension, if you will, go to the mnk.com email address.
And is there any distinction between, well, do you sometimes use to send emails your Mallincrodt.com email versus your mnk.com email?
Objection, lack of foundation. Seems a fact, not evidence.
You understand the question, Mr. Trudeau?
I'm sorry, repeat the question.
Well, you said that you have two email addresses, the Mallincrodt.com address and the mnk.com address, correct?
That's correct. To the best of my knowledge, that's correct, yes.
Can you physically send emails from both of those email addresses?
I believe so, yes.
And is there any distinction between when you would use the one email address versus the other email address?
I typically use the mnk.com address.
And you said typically, so the times that you use the Mallincrodt.com email address, when would that be?
I don't have any specific recollection of when one would be used versus another, but typically I would use the mnk.com address.
So as far as you're concerned, there's no real distinction. They're just two different email addresses and you can use them for your work, whichever you choose.
Again, I typically use the mnk.com email address.
And is there any reason why someone would email you at the mnk.com address and someone else may email you at the mallincrodt.com email address?
Objection, lack of foundation.
I wouldn't know.
Okay. Do you have any other email addresses at Mallincrodt since the time you joined? Well, let's talk about since the time the PLC was formed in 2013.
Not to my knowledge.
Do you have any aliases that you use for purposes of receiving email or other communications with respect to your work?
Not to my knowledge.
What is your personal email address? And do you have any other personal email address that you use?
Possible that I may have other old email addresses, personal email addresses, but I don't use those.
And is it fair that since 2013, when you took over the PLC, that the main personal email address you've used is?
Yes.
So is it fair that you don't have a Gmail account?
I don't know if I have a Gmail account or not. It's possible. I don't use a Gmail account.
And do you ever use your personal yahoo.com email account for business purposes?
Typically not. I can't say I never have not, but typically not.
And if you would have occasion to use your yahoo.com email for business purposes, why would that be?
It'd primarily be by accident.
And as part of this lawsuit or any of the opioids lawsuits, did any lawyers come in and ask to search your personal email for documents or emails related to your work at Mallincrodt?
I don't recall. I just don't recall.
Did you personally conduct a search of your personal email to see if you had any responsive documents or information with respect to this lawsuit or any of the opioids lawsuits?
I did not.
Do you ever use text message for purposes of your work at Mallincrodt?
I may use text messages to communicate with people, yes.
And is that on a work phone or on a private phone?
The work phone.
And what is the number of your work phone? And did any lawyers or anyone come and take your phone and download your text messages for purposes of this lawsuit or any of the opioids lawsuits?
I don't recall.
Did you personally provide access to your work phone for purposes of access to your text messages to any lawyers or anyone else with respect to this lawsuit or any of the opioids lawsuits?
No.
Is that your current work cell phone?
It is, yes.
And have you had that same cell phone and that same phone number since the PLC formed in 2013?
I have, yes.
And you said it was a 609 area code, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And that area code pertains to what city?
I believe that area code is Central and South New Jersey. It was a phone number that I brought with me from my prior employer.
And your prior employer was who?
Bayer.
Do you use that same cell phone and that same number for personal phone calls as well?
I do.
But you have, you, Mark Trudeau, you have one cell phone that you use for work and for personal?
I have one primary cell phone number. I have a secondary cell phone number that was introduced within the last couple of years. It actually applies to my, it's a secondary phone number.
And the secondary phone number, is that personal use or is that a work phone?
It is, can be used for either. I don't usually use it. I don't even know what the number is actually.
And who pays for that cell phone?
The company does.
And who pays for your 609 cell phone?
They're both in the same cell phone. It's one cell phone that has a primary and a secondary number.
I see. So the company pays for all the calls made on both those numbers.
That's correct, yes.
If you were to leave the company, would you have to turn that phone in?
Objection.
I don't know.
And do you have a personal laptop or personal computer that you use for work purposes?
I do not.
So the only computer that you use for purposes of your work with Mallincrodt is one provided to you by the company?
That's correct.
And is that a desktop computer or is that a laptop computer, or do you have both?
I primarily use an iPad.
And if you were to leave the company, would you have to turn that iPad back into the company?
Objection.
I don't know.
And did anyone ask for your iPad to do any searches with respect to information or documents you may have sent or received or saved on your iPad for purposes of this litigation?
I don't recall.
And do you recall if you conducted any searches or turned your iPad over to someone to conduct searches for any information on that iPad for purposes of this litigation or any of the opioids litigation?
I don't recall.
What is your current net worth, Mr. Trudeau?
I don't know the exact number. Are you looking for a range?
Sure, let's start with the range.
Let me just pause here for a second. Do we have to designate, Andrew, as we're going along, or do we have an opportunity to designate portions of the transcript as confidential post the deposition?
We can designate it after, as long as Ms. Liu is fine with that.
Yeah, so I'm fine with you asking these questions, but these are sensitive personal information, and we are going to designate that the transcript confidential for that reason. I hope we have that understanding.
So I would have to take a look at the protective order again and see, is that something that's been agreed to and ordered as information that's properly designated as confidential?
But, I can represent that the protective order will cover this, but you're willing to abide by the terms of the protective order?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Then just you're on notice that we will designate this as confidential.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right, Mr. Trudeau. So we were.
Objection vague.
If you understand, what do you ask? What are you counting as assets?
What am I counting as assets? It would be anything that I own. And then obviously the net worth would be netted out against the corresponding liabilities.
And in terms of assets, are you including all of your investments or stocks?
Anything that has value, yes.
And real estate or other property?
Yes.
Objection.
It's possible.
Objection.
It's possible.
Objection.
I really don't know. I really don't know.
It could
That's
be
correct.
Objection.
As I said, it's possible.
Do you have a personal accountant, Mr. Trudeau?
I have a financial advisor, yes.
And what company or who does that person work for?
Record will reflect this, but we are pretty far afield from the subject I think we're here to talk about today.
What is your current title with Mallincrodt?
I'm the president and CEO of Mallinkrodt PLC.
And have you always been the president and CEO of Mallincrodt PLC since the PLC was formed in 2013?
Yes.
And do you hold any other titles with Mallincrodt PLC?
I'm also a member of the board.
And have you been a member of the board since the PLC formed in 2013?
Yes.
And are you separately compensated for your role as president and CEO of the PLC and your role as a member of the board of the PLC?
No.
How much time have you spent in Ireland since the PLC formed in 2013?
Objection vague.
I haven't spent much time there recently with COVID-19. But typically I would spend several weeks a year.
And in 2013, do you know approximately how many weeks you spent in Ireland?
I would say approximately 4 or 6 in that range.
And when you would go to Ireland, and I assume this is for work, not pleasure, right?
That's correct.
What office would you go to in 2013?
In 2013, don't recall. I know that we operated out of hotels for a while, and we also operated out of some of our physical plants a bit as well.
And what about in 2014? How many weeks did you spend in Ireland with respect to your work?
I don't recall. I'm estimating, but it would have been similar to 2013.
And in terms of where you would go when you were in Ireland for work, is the same answer as 2013, hotels or some of your plants?
Yes.
Have you ever had an executive office in Ireland?
Objection vague.
Physical office, no.
So Mallincrodt PLC has announced that it plans to file for bankruptcy in the coming weeks. Is that correct?
No.
There have been announcements in the news related to Mallincrodt and bankruptcy. Do you know anything about those?
Objection vague.
I'm aware that there have been reports that it's possible, yes.
And to the extent it's possible, do you have an understanding of which company may possibly go bankrupt in the coming weeks?
Objection vague.
No.
You don't know.
No.
Have you had any involvement in any preparations for Chapter 11 filing with respect to your work?
Objection overly broad. Vague.
I've been public to say that the company is considering a range of strategic options, including Chapter 11 reorganization.
And when you say the company in that sentence, what company are you referring to?
The overall enterprise, Mallincrodt PLC.
So one of the strategic options that Mallincrodt PLC is currently considering is Chapter 11 reorganization. Is that fair?
Yes.
And to the extent Mallincrodt PLC is considering Chapter 11 reorganization, would that be of Mallincrodt PLC?
Objection vague.
Yes.
And Mallincrodt PLC is an Irish corporation, correct?
To the best of my knowledge, that's correct.
So an Irish corporation can file for Chapter 11 in the United States?
Objection calls for a legal conclusion.
I don't know the details of that.
Are there plans for Mallincrodt PLC to file for bankruptcy in Ireland or in the UK?
We haven't come to any conclusion.
Do you understand that if Mallincrodt PLC files for Chapter 11 in the US, would any part of the global business survive?
Objection vague.
I don't know.
Would any part of Mallincrodt PLC not be part of the Chapter 11 filing?
Objection, vague.
I don't know.
Do you know whether or not you'll have a job in 2021 with Mallincrodt PLC?
Yes.
And will you have a job with Mallincrodt PLC in 2021?
Under current circumstances, yes.
And what will that job be?
President and CEO of Mallincrodt PLC.
And under current circumstances, will you have a job with Mallincrodt PLC in 2022?
Objection. Calls for speculation.
In the calendar year, yes, likely. However, it's unclear as to what that will look like that far into the future.
So what are you basing these answers on?
The fact that we have agreed to a retention program that extends potentially into 2022.
And who would be included in that retention program besides yourself?
A number of key executives. I don't know the specific number.
And when you say a number of key executives, you mean with the PLC, is that right?
Some are with PLC, yes.
And can you give me the names of any of the key executives who you know to be part of the retention program?
Would be the primary officers of PLC, so it would include our CFO, our Chief Scientific Officer, Chief Commercial Officer, General Counsel, Chief HR Officer.
And I assume you're going to receive some sort of compensation as part of that retention program?
Objection.
That's correct.
And what compensation will you receive as part of this retention program?
I believe this number is public. I believe the number is before tax. I believe it's on the order of 1.575 million.
And to the extent it's unclear whether the retention program will last past 2021, do you expect to receive additional compensation if it extends into 2022?
Not as a result of this program, no.
Would there be other negotiations and discussions to the extent you are asked to remain on with Mallincrodt PLC into 2022 related to compensation?
Objection.
I don't know that.
Have you already signed an agreement to be part of this retention program such that you are not planning to leave Mallincrodt PLC in 2021?
Yes.
And that agreement extends to precisely what date?
It's the earlier of, and again, I don't recall the exact date. It's a date in May of 2022. Or if the company did determine to go into Chapter 11 reorganization, the emergence date.
And what are the other strategic options that you're currently considering besides Chapter 11 reorganization?
Continuing to be an ongoing public entity in our current form.
Anything else?
Certainly, we've considered a whole range of options.
Sitting here today, what do you think the chances are that the company is going into Chapter 11 reorganization?
Objection vague.
I don't know.
Do you think it's more than likely?
Objection vague. Objection asked and answered.
I don't know. We haven't come to any conclusion.
And the roughly $1.5 million that you've agreed to as part of the retention program, if you don't go the Chapter 11 route, does that retention program even apply?
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
So if you continue to be a going concern and continue to operate into 2021, is the total compensation you expect to receive $1.5 million?
No.
If you go into Chapter 11 bankruptcy, is the total compensation you expect to receive in 2021 $1.5 million?
No.
What additional compensation? Well, let's talk about if you don't go into Chapter 11 bankruptcy. What total compensation do you expect to earn in 2021?
I can't speculate only because the 90+% of my compensation is variable and tied to company performance.
I see. So if you do go into Chapter 11 reorganization, in addition to the 1.5 million, what would you expect to receive in terms of compensation?
Again, unknown, because there are a whole range of variables that could impact that.
So sitting here today, you have no idea how much you will be compensated in 2021?
Objection mischaracterizes his prior testimony. Objection calls for speculation.
As I said, I don't know what my compensation will be in 2021.
Well, other than salary. So is the 1.5 million simply salary?
Objection.
No.
What does the 1.5 million include?
The retention that I described.
So what other compensation could you receive in 2021 if the company goes into Chapter 11?
I could receive salary. I could receive bonus. I could receive other compensation.
So you said previously 90% of your compensation is tied to company performance. Is that right?
In a typical year, yes.
So if the company goes into bankruptcy, what bonus would you receive that presumably would be tied to performance?
Objection calls for speculation.
At this point, I don't know.
So in addition to the 1.5 million is just it's essentially another form of bonus, right? It doesn't even include salary, normal bonus, and other compensation that you would receive in any normal year working at the PLC. Is that fair?
I will object to the form of the question.
It's been paid for retention.
So it's in addition to salary, bonus, and other forms of compensation.
Yes.
So potentially you stand to make more in 2021 than you did, for example, in 2018?
Objection. I don't know.
Is it possible?
Objection calls for speculation.
It's possible. I just don't know.
The company is going into bankruptcy and the president and CEO of the company stands to potentially make more when the company's in bankruptcy than when it was a going concern in 2018?
Objection both mischaracterizes his testimony and still calls for speculation.
Don't know what my compensation will be in 2021.
So are you familiar with reports in the Wall Street Journal in 2019 that said that Mallincrodt had changed its severance package policy?
Objection, vague.
Am I aware? I believe there was a report, yes.
And did Mallincrodt in fact change its severance package policy on or about 2019?
Objection.
I don't recall the details.
So the reports said that you, Mr. Trudeau, would receive 2 years of your annual salary in the case of involuntary termination of employment for reason other than cause. Is that true?
I don't know if that's specifically true, no.
So are you familiar with whether or not, if you, under the current severance package policy of Mallincrodt PLC, whether or not you would receive 2 years of your annual salary in the case of involuntary termination of employment for reason other than cause?
Objection, asked and answered.
Don't know that.
Do you know what the current severance package policy is for executives such as yourself?
I do not.
But you don't know whether or not you stand to receive a lump sum payment?
I do not.
And if the company goes into Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and you are no longer with the company after it emerges from that bankruptcy, would you understand that to be an involuntary termination of your employment for reason other than cause?
Objection calls for a legal conclusion. Objection calls for speculation.
I don't know.
The Wall Street Journal also reported that the company agreed to indemnify the board and the executives in legal proceedings, including liquidating. Do you remember reading that?
I don't recall, no.
Is that true?
I don't know.
Objection.
Well, let me ask it this way. Do you know whether or not the company would indemnify you as a member of the board or you as an executive with the company in legal proceedings, including liquidation?
Objection calls for a legal conclusion.
I don't know the details of that.
The lawyers that are here with you today, are they your personal lawyers or do they represent the PLC?
Here on behalf of the witness and on behalf of Spec GX and LLC. There's no jurisdiction over PLC.
So the question was for you, Mr. Trudeau. Do you understand that the lawyers that are here representing you today represent you in your personal capacity or represent Mallincrodt PLC or the other Mallincrodt defendants in this case?
I don't have any details of that other than what's been communicated by the lawyers here today.
So you're not paying these lawyers for representing you here today, are you?
Objection, vague.
Me personally?
Correct.
Not to my knowledge, no.
You don't expect to get an invoice from Ropes and Gray after this deposition for the lawyer's time, correct? To you personally?
Objection.
I don't expect that.
Have you been sued personally as part of any of the opioids litigation?
I don't know the details of that.
So you don't know whether or not you've been named Mark C. Trudeau as a defendant in any of the opioids litigation?
I do not.
If you were named or added to any of the opioids litigation, in your personal capacity as Mark C. Trudeau as an individual defendant, would you expect that the company would pay for your representation in that instance?
Objection calls for legal conclusion.
I don't know.
Do you have a personal lawyer, Mr. Trudeau?
Objection vague.
I have consulted lawyers for personal matters, yes.
Have you consulted lawyers for personal matters related to your work with Mallincrodt?
No, not to my knowledge.
Have you consulted with, for example, an employment lawyer to look over terms of, for example, the retention program or other contracts that you may have with the company?
I have not, no.
To the extent you've consulted with lawyers related to personal matters, when was the last time you talked to a lawyer with respect to a personal matter?
I'm going to object. What's the point of this? This deposition is about the jurisdiction and opioid, and you're asking something that's really far afield.
You can answer the question, Mr. Trudeau.
This year.
Pardon me?
This year.
And who was that lawyer?
I don't recall his name at the moment.
And without getting into specifics, what was the nature of the personal issue?
A real estate transaction.
And do you have a personal lawyer who you use to consult with on, sort of miscellaneous personal or general personal issues?
Objection asked and answered. Objection vague.
I consult personal lawyers on a variety of topics.
Do you have any personal lawyer who you've known and worked with over the course of any number of years?
I've worked with one particular lawyer on estate matters for a couple of years.
And you said estate matters?
Yes.
Do you employ or use the company's lawyers as your own personal lawyers?
Objection.
Not to my knowledge.
I'm going to ask, so I know you received a box, is that correct, Mr. Trudeau, with exhibits in it?
There are boxes here, yes.
Okay, so I box, or I think that our tech folks are going to put up different exhibits on the screen. I need to review.
So maybe we do have a box. We do have a box here we can open up. It's taped shut. We can open it up for Mr. Trudeau, and he can reach in and get whatever you want to show him.
Okay. They also put them up on the screen, so whichever you prefer, John.
Counsel, sorry for interrupting, but someone's messing with the microphone on the table. There's a lot of...
I'm sorry, that's Andrew opening the box near the microphone. Hold on, I'll stop talking while he does that.
The box is now open. Are these rubber bands? Yeah, okay, that's all. So I can get at these.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just cut the rubber bands.
Yeah, just cut the rubber band.
Okay, so while they're doing that, Mr. Trudeau, why don't we continue? So I think the last question I asked was whether or not you use the company's lawyers as your personal lawyers, to which you responded no. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Objection.
Am I aware of that allegation? Yes.
And what do you know about that allegation?
Nothing.
So So I'm going to object here. This has nothing whatsoever to do with this case, with the subject matter the court sent us here today. This is just meant to harass the witness. And if this keeps going, we're going to have to call the judge because this is well beyond the scope of where we need to be today.
We'll get there, Mr. Bucher. I promise you we'll get there.
No, we're going to stick to what we're supposed to stick to, which
Okay,
is what's relevant to this litigation, and what the court allowed this deposition to go forward, the reasons this court allowed the deposition to go forward. This has got nothing to do with anything relevant to this litigation. It is simply meant to harass the witness.
It's not meant to harass the witness. I will get there. And if you still share those views, you're welcome to pick up the phone and call the court. So let me ask my questions. Let me see if we can establish this is not meant to be harassing. And if you still feel that way, again, we can take a break and you can call the judge.
That's what I understand.
And how do you understand that?
Objection.
Based on what you just described.
So to be clear, I'm asking you a question. I'm not telling you the answer.
I mean, unless we wrap this up very quickly, one or two more questions, we're hitting a point where we are going to have to call the court.
Okay. Well, let me try to get where I'm going, and then you can decide if you're going to call the court. So I'm trying to clarify his answer to a prior question.
Yes, that's what I understand.
Okay. And so my next question is, what is the basis of that knowledge?
I don't recall.
Is the first time that you knew that when you received an email from a Mr. Schuler?
Objection.
I don't recall.
All right. I think we're going to take let's take a break here. I want to think about whether we should call the court. All right.
Let me
Going off the record.
John.
I want to consider what our options are because this line of questions is well beyond where we should be. So we've been going an hour anyway. Let's just take a short break.
That's fine.
Off the record at 9:59 a.m.